All right, welcome back. Thanks so much for listening. And I'm talking about Gideon. This is going to be the last episode on Gideon here. Well, at this time, anyways. The story of Gideon has just meant so much to me. It came out of the blue, actually. One day, I was just reading my Bible, and this happens to me. I've read this passage before. It's not like it's the first time I've ever read about Gideon or something like that. And God just reaches down and grabs me by the scruff of the neck, and I sit up and I pay attention and I'm listening, and I'm just struck by how God is speaking to Gideon, how he's dealing with him, his grace, his love, his presence, and all these things. And I've wanted to share this for a while, and so I'm so glad I can share this with you today. So if you haven't listened to any of the other episodes, you need to go back and listen to those. But I assume that you have at this point. So. The last thing that I want to talk about with the story of Gideon is the next step when Gideon goes out. So he's got all these confirmations, all these signs have been delivered and everything like that, and God is having Gideon fight the Midianites off. And actually, there's a bunch of different a bunch of different nations. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples are all kind of gathered together and making a mess of things for them. And so what happens then is Gideon sends out messengers to the surrounding tribes of Israel, all the neighbors, and he says, basically, let's go. Let's build an army and fight these guys and get rid of them, and because this is ridiculous, right? And God is calling me to do this, basically, right? The interesting thing is that, and this is just amazing, okay? Because we always think more is better, right? We always think that, okay, if I'm going to do this, okay, I've got this calling, I've got this thing I know I need to do. Okay, I need to get lots of people on board, right? And God says, no, actually. So God says, they assemble. They've got all these people, and this is in chapter 7 of the book of Judges, and it says, all his men camped at the spring, and they have a total of 32,000 people in their army. Now, that's not a bad army. There is, there's quite a few of their enemies there, and I think later on the number that's given is 135,000. So, 32,000 versus 135,000, that's not too bad, right? We're talking about, an army that's a tenth of the size of what they're facing. And so God is still going to be required here, right? Like, this is a big deal. And but God says, actually, just hold on. It's too big. God says in verse 2, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her. Announce to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So, get this, 22,000 people leave. 10,000 people remain. Okay, now, looking at that, humanly speaking, of course, okay, you got 22,000 people who are scared, who are fearful, who are trembling. Maybe, yeah, it's probably a good idea to let them go home, right? You got 10,000 people who are on fire, ready to go, courageous. Okay, now we can do this thing. Because really, if you're going into battle, you're 10th the size of your enemy, you're going to need to be totally committed. And if you've got 22,000, two out of every 3 people are scared, they're going to make that last person scared, and everyone's going to freak out and cause problems, right? So, okay, humanly speaking, that's actually a wise move on God's part. not to critique God, but what we're doing here is actually rationalizing what we think about. Like, this is how our minds work, and this is how we think, okay? So, excuse me, we can justify, right, in our minds what God's doing here until you keep reading. And the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. And without getting into details, he sends all 10,000 away except for 300. So now, 300. We've got 1% of what we originally started with, which was an army a tenth of the size of what they're facing. So now we've got 1%, 300. We used to have 32,000. Now we have 300. Okay, now God's got to come through for us, right? And that is exactly what God did it for, okay? So God, again, is just most honored in our weakness. And we constantly think like Gideon. If you flip back to chapter 6, verse 15, but Lord, Gideon asked, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Like, I'm nothing. I can't do what you're asking me to do. And God says, I am with you. That's all you need to know. And then Gideon asks for all these signs. God is faithful. He gives these signs to Gideon. So Gideon knows what he's got to do. He assembles a reasonable army, 32,000 strong. Still way too small compared to their enemies. And then God whittles it down to 300. 1% of what it originally was. And that is the army that God's going to use. That speaks to me because so often I feel like I need more. I need more. I need more people. I need more help. I need more, subscribers or whatever. And God says, you know what? I'm going to do this thing. How does that work out for you? Is it more money that you feel like you need? Is it more groceries? Is it more exercise, more faith, more whatever? Pick whatever it is for you. What do you need more of? And is God saying you can do with less because then when I show up, you're going to believe and have faith and you won't be able to brag that it was you. See, it's not that the more part is bad. It's that when God does something, he wants the glory. And we are so inclined in our rationalization, in our thinking, to first of all doubt and not believe and think of all the ways that it can't be done. But then we're also quick to, when it happens, when God comes through for us, is we take the credit. We stand up and say, well, that's how I did that. And God's like, no. He's saying to Gideon, there are too many men. There are still too many men. He says it right there. He says, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her. Announce to the people, go home. And is God saying that to you today? Is that something that resonates with you? It's something that resonates with me because I'm constantly thinking in my life, with Meditate on Christ, like how can I get more meditations? How can I get more content? How can I get more, whatever, right? More employees, more help, more followers, more, And while I think that is all the end goal, the problem is that, is it going to be my glory in the end? Is it me who did this, or is it God? And I think that God is saying he wants the glory because he's doing this. And so what I want to do is circle all the way back around to the first episode of talking about Gideon, because what God was doing in this point in history, 3,500 or some years ago, was crucial to the environment, the stability, the political stability, the economic stability, the spiritual stability that we now live in and enjoy. And that is such a blessing. Like, I have never had to defend my property from a bunch of, tens of thousands of invaders. Never. Never. I have never had to kill a king. I have never had to fight to the death for something. Like, none of this stuff is a part of my world. Why? Because of what God was trying to do here has become just such a standard way of living in our world that that we don't even think about it. And I am so grateful to God for what he does at this time of history, but also for what he speaks into our hearts today. God is most honored in our weakness. Why? Because then he gets the glory. So that's kind of the last thing that I want to talk about with Gideon. There's more, but it's an amazing story, and I don't want to keep on going about it. But God is most honored in our weakness. Thank you, God. That's so amazing. So go with God today. Go in peace. God bless you, and we will speak soon. Thanks.